Two twins ask a millionaire for help on Christmas Eve. The next day he sees them at his wife's grave. The grand clock in the Duran mansion struck 9 times, each chime echoing through the empty hallways like a harsh reminder of the loneliness that consumed Robert. He gazed at the crackling fireplace, a glass of aged whiskey in his wrinkled hand, the amber liquid reflecting the dancing flames, so alive, so contrasting with the emptiness in his heart. "Another Christmas, Elise," Robert murmured to the portrait of his late wife above the fireplace. "Exactly 1 year without you." His eyes, once filled with ambition and vigor, were now dull, surrounded by deep wrinkles that told the story of a man consumed by bitterness. Robert Durand, at 60 years old, was the epitome of success in the eyes of the world. A business empire built with his own hands, a fortune that could sustain generations. But on that night, he was just an old, lonely man, haunted by the ghosts of the past and the deafening silence of the present. A flash of memory hit him like a punch in the gut. Elise, radiant in her favorite red dress, decorating the Christmas tree the year before. Her melodious laughter echoed in his mind, a sound he feared he was beginning to forget. "Come on, Robert," she would say, her eyes sparkling with infectious joy. "Where's your Christmas spirit?" He had grumbled something about work, about a crucial merger that needed to be finalized. Now, a year later, Robert would give anything to go back to that moment, to embrace Elise one last time, to tell her how much he loved her. The whiskey burned his throat as he downed the rest of the glass in one go. With a grunt, Robert rose from his leather armchair, his heavy steps echoing through the silent mansion. Each room was a gallery of memories. The piano Elise loved to play, now covered in a thin layer of dust, the kitchen where she insisted on preparing Christmas dinner, even with a staff of chefs at her disposal, the conservatory, her favorite refuge, now a graveyard of wilted plants and forgotten dreams. Robert stopped in front of the imposing Christmas tree in the entrance hall, its bare branches a silent accusation. Elise always insisted on decorating it together, a tradition he now realized was the heart of their Christmases. This year, not even the staff had bothered to adorn it. Why should they? The master of the house had made it clear that Christmas was just another day on the calendar. A heavy sigh escaped Robert's lips. He walked to the window, watching the softly falling snowflakes outside, covering the world in a pure white blanket. How many times had Elise dragged him out, insisting they make snowmen like grown-up children? "So you were right, my love," he whispered, his hand touching the cold glass. "I should have cherished every moment." The sudden ringing of the doorbell cut through the silence like a knife, making Robert jump. He frowned, checking his wristwatch. Who could it be at this hour on Christmas Eve? Hesitantly, Robert walked to the door. For a brief moment, an irrational glimmer of hope sparked in his chest. What if it were Elise? What if the past year had been just a terrible nightmare? Shaking his head to dispel such foolish thoughts, Robert turned the doorknob, opening the heavy oak door. What he saw on the other side made his heart stop for a moment. Before him, shivering in the cold night, were 2 children. Twins, he realized immediately. A boy and a girl, no more than 10 years old, with large brown eyes that looked at him with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Please, sir," the boy stammered, his voice trembling from the cold and nervousness. We need help." The girl, holding her brother's hand tightly, stepped forward. "Our mother is very ill," she said, her voice small but determined. "We need money for her medicines." Robert froze, a turbulence of conflicting emotions swirling within him. Suspicion, irritation, curiosity, and surprisingly, a pang of compassion that he hadn't felt in a long time. As he looked at those 2 small figures shivering in the snow, something inside Robert began to move. It was as if the ice that had formed around his heart was starting to melt, slowly. "Come in," he heard himself saying, his voice hoarse from disuse. Let's talk." As the children passed by him, entering the mansion timidly, Robert couldn't imagine how this simple act of opening the door would change his life forever. Christmas, which promised to be just another day of loneliness and bitterness, was about to transform into something much more meaningful. Robert Durand's Christmas Eve had only just begun, and with it, an unexpected journey of redemption, compassion, and, perhaps, a miracle. Robert watched the two small figures enter his mansion, leaving wet, snowy footprints on the Persian rug in the entrance hall. The contrast between the ragged children and the opulent luxury surrounding them was stark, almost painful to see. "Can't you have names?" Robert asked, his voice harsher than he intended. The boy stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of his sister. "I'm Thomas, sir," he said, trying to sound brave despite the tremor in his voice. "And this is my sister, Sophie." Sophie nodded shyly from behind her brother, her large brown eyes scanning the environment with a mix of awe and apprehension. Robert cleared his throat, feeling strangely uncomfortable. "Well, Thomas and Sophie," he said, gesturing toward the living room. "Come closer to the fire before you freeze." The children followed hesitantly, their steps almost inaudible on the marble floor. When they reached the living room, both gasped at the sight of the imposing Christmas tree, even without decorations. "Sit down," Robert ordered, indicating the leather sofa. He noticed how the children sat on the edge, as if afraid to dirty the expensive furniture. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air for a few moments. Robert found himself studying the twins more closely. Their faces were thin but not malnourished. Their clothes, although clearly second-hand, were clean and well cared for. There was a dignity about them that intrigued him. Robert finally broke the silence. "You mentioned your mother is ill." Sophie nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. She has a very high fever and hasn't been able to get out of bed for days." "And you don't have money for medicines?" Robert asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. Thomas looked Robert straight in the eyes, a flash of wounded pride crossing his young face. "Normally we manage, Isa. Mom works hard and we help as much as we can, but with her ill..." The boy's voice faltered, and Sophie finished. "The money we had saved barely covered food this week. Nothing was left for medicines." Robert felt something twist inside him. Was it compassion, or just indigestion from the whiskey? He wasn't used to dealing with this kind of situation. His rational mind told him to send the children away, that this wasn't his problem. But something, perhaps the memory of Elise, held him back. "And what makes you think I would help?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Sophie looked down at the floor, nervously playing with the hem of her worn coat. We heard stories about you, Mr. Durand," she said softly. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Stories?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir. People talk about how you are rich and powerful. Some say you are, well, harsh and stingy." Robert completed with a bitter smile. The children exchanged nervous glances, but Sophie surprised Robert with her response. "No, sir. They say you used to be very generous, that something changed after Mrs. Durand." The mention of Elise made Robert stand up abruptly, startling the twins. He walked to the window, watching the falling snow outside, trying to control the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "Mr. Durand," Thomas's voice brought him back to the present. "Gus, we didn't mean to offend. It's just that we didn't know who else to turn to." Robert turned around slowly, looking at the two children. Their eyes were filled with a mix of fear and hope that hit him like a punch in the gut. For a moment, he saw himself reflected in those eyes, the boy he once was, desperate and alone, before he built his empire. With a deep sigh, Robert made his decision. "How much do you need for the medicines?" The twins' faces lit up instantly. $200 should be enough, sir," Thomas replied quickly. "For the medicines and maybe some food." Robert scoffed. $200, an amount that meant nothing to him but could mean everything to this family. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a small box. When he opened it, the twins saw stacks of bills, more money than they had ever seen in their lives. Robert counted some bills and turned to the children. "Here are $500, he said, extending the money. "This should cover the medicines, food, and anything else you might need." Sophie let out a small cry of joy, but Thomas hesitated before taking the money. "Sir, it's very generous, but..." "Just take it, boy," Robert grunted. "Before I change my mind." Thomas accepted the money with trembling hands, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mr. Durand. You don't know how much this means to us." Robert felt something warm in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He cleared his throat, trying to hide his discomfort. "Well, don't just stand there. Don't you have medicines to buy?" The children sprang up and ready to leave, but Robert surprised them again. "Wait," he said, grabbing his coat. "I'm coming with you." "You are?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Robert shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "It's Christmas Eve. I doubt many pharmacies will be open. I know one that operates 24 hours. As he guided the children out of the mansion and into his luxury car, Robert wondered what on earth he was doing. He, Robert Durand, the shark of the business world, was taking two strange children to buy medicines on Christmas Eve. But when he saw the hopeful smiles of Thomas and Sophie in the back seat of his car, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. As he drove through the snow-covered streets, Robert couldn't help but think about how Elise would have approved of his actions. For the first time in a year, the thought of his wife brought a smile to his lips instead of pain. Perhaps, just perhaps, this Christmas wouldn't be as lonely after all. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, the winter sun casting a pale light over the snow-covered city. Robert Durand woke early, as he always did on this particular day, but this time, something was different. The weight of loneliness that usually crushed him felt a bit lighter, as if the events of the previous night had opened a small crack in his armor of bitterness. Dressing carefully, Robert picked up the bouquet of white roses he had ordered, Elise's favorites. With one last look at her portrait on the bedside table, he left the house, determined to fulfill his annual ritual. The cemetery was quiet and serene when Robert arrived, his footsteps breaking the freshly fallen snow's crust. He knew the path by heart, his feet automatically leading him to Elise's final resting place. But as he approached her grave, Robert froze, his heart giving a painful leap in his chest. There, kneeling before the marble headstone, were two familiar small figures. Thomas and Sophie, the twins he had helped the night before, were carefully arranging a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the grave. For a moment, Robert was paralyzed, unable to process the scene before him. 1,000 questions raced through his mind, mixed with a wave of conflicting emotions. Confusion, surprise, even a pang of irrational jealousy. How dare these children intrude on this private moment? Finally, finding his voice, Robert cleared his throat loudly. The twins turned quickly, their faces a mix of surprise and something that looked like guilt. "Mr. Durand," Thomas exclaimed, helping his sister to her feet. We didn't expect to see you here." Robert raised an eyebrow, his voice a mix of confusion and suspicion. "I could say the same. What exactly are you two doing here?" Sophie stepped forward, her large eyes moist and fixed on Robert. "We came to thank Mrs. Elise, sir," she said softly, "as we do every year." The revelation hit Robert like a punch in the gut. "So every year," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You knew my wife?" The twins exchanged a quick glance before Thomas responded, "Yes, sir. Mrs. Elise she was our godmother." The world seemed to spin around Robert. He leaned against Elise's headstone, feeling as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. "Godmother?" he managed to say. "But when?" Sophie, sensing Robert's shock, explained gently, "It started about 5 years ago. Mr. Durand, Mrs. Elise found us at the community center where she did volunteer work." Thomas continued, "Our mum was going through tough times, and Mrs. Elise, she just took us under her wing. She helped with food, clothes, school supplies, but more than that, she gave us love and attention." Robert felt unshed tears burn in his eyes. 5 years. For 5 years, his Elise had been a vital part of these children's lives, and he had no idea. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in his own world? "Why did she never tell me?" Robert asked, more to himself than to the twins. Sophie answered softly, "She wanted to, Mr. Durand. Many times she talked about how she wished to introduce us to you. But she was afraid of how I would react," Robert completed, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. He remembered how many times he had complained about Elise's lost causes, about how she was wasting her time and resources on strangers. What a fool he had been. A heavy silence fell over the small group. Robert looked at Elise's grave, at the flowers carefully placed by the twins, and then at the children. Something, perhaps the memory of Elise, held him back from sending them away. "Did she talk about me?" Robert asked softly, his voice choked with emotion. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Jane all the time, sir. She always said how brilliant and hard-working you were, how you built everything from scratch," Sophie added, "and she always said how, deep down, you had a huge heart, that you just needed a chance to show it to the world." The children's words were like arrows hitting straight to Robert's heart. Elise had always believed in the best of him, even when he himself had forgotten who he was. "Last night," Robert began, a sudden realization hitting him. "You came to my house because Mrs. Elise always said, if we were ever truly desperate, we should come to you," Thomas completed. "She said that, despite your tough appearance, you had a heart of gold." Robert could no longer hold back the tears. They flowed freely down his face, years of suppressed emotions finally finding an outlet. Without thinking, he pulled Thomas and Sophie into a tight embrace, surprising himself as much as the children. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked. "Thank you for keeping alive a part of Elise that I had forgotten." When they finally separated, Robert looked again at Elise's grave. The inscription on the headstone, which he knew by heart, seemed to shine with a new meaning. "Elise Durand, beloved wife, friend and guardian of hearts." "You always knew, didn't you, my love?" Robert murmured to the headstone. "You knew I needed to rediscover my humanity." Turning to the twins, Robert made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. "Thomas, Sophie," he said, his voice firm despite the tears, "would you like to hear more about my wife, about her work? Perhaps we can continue what she started." The twins' faces lit up with radiant smiles. "We'd love to, Mr. Durand," Sophie exclaimed. As the three left the cemetery together, Robert felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in a year, he felt hope. Elise might be gone, but her legacy of love and compassion lived on through these children, and now through him as well. Christmas, which had begun with the usual sadness, now promised to be the beginning of something new and wonderful. Robert knew he had much to learn and much to repair, but with the memory of Elise guiding him and the innocence of Thomas and Sophie to inspire him, he was ready for the journey. In the days that followed the encounter at the cemetery, Robert Durand found himself on a journey he never imagined undertaking. The revelation that Elise had a secret life of philanthropy, a life that included Thomas and Sophie, had shaken the foundations of everything he believed about his marriage. With the determination that had made him a titan of business, Robert decided to unravel the mystery his late wife had left behind. He began by rummaging through Elise's office, a room in the mansion he had barely touched since her death. As he sifted through drawers and files, memories flooded his mind. Flashback 5 years ago. "Robert, could you please listen to me for a moment?" Elise's voice was laced with frustration. Robert barely looked up from his laptop. "Darling, I'm in the middle of a crucial negotiation. Can it wait?" Elise sighed deeply. "It always can wait, can't it? Our marriage, my projects, everything always can wait." That finally caught Robert's attention. He looked at his wife, noticing for the first time the weariness in her eyes. "What projects?" "Exactly, Robert," Elise replied, her voice a mix of sadness and resignation. "You don't even know her. Present." Robert shook his head, trying to push away the painful memory. How many times had he ignored the signs? How many opportunities to truly know his wife had he squandered? Continuing his search, Robert found a hidden folder in the back of a drawer. Inside it were receipts from donations, brochures from community centers, and a diary. With trembling hands, he opened the small leather-bound notebook. Elise's elegant handwriting filled the pages, and Robert began to read, feeling as if he were invading a sacred sanctuary. "Today, I met 2 extraordinary children at the center," one entry said. "Thomas and Sophie, so young, but with eyes that have already seen too much. I wish I could do more for them." Robert felt a lump form in his throat. He continued reading, absorbing each word like a man dying of thirst in the desert. Flashback 3 years ago. "Elise, are you donating money again?" Robert asked, His voice tinged with irritation as he examined the bank statement. Elise looked at him defiantly. "And if I am? I'm not saying you shouldn't," he replied, trying to keep his calm. "But where is all this going?" For a moment, Robert saw something flash in Elise's eyes. Fear, guilt, but it was quickly replaced by determination. "To people who truly need it, Robert. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." The words hit him like a slap. "What do you mean by that?" Elise sighed, the fight leaving her body. "Nothing, Robert. Forget it. Present." Robert closed his eyes, the pain of the memory almost physical. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in his own world that he couldn't see the chasm growing between him and Elise? Returning to the diary, he continued reading. There were entries about Elise's volunteer work, her dreams of doing more, her frustration with his indifference, and, intertwined with it all, mentions of Thomas and Sophie. "The twins have made so much progress this month," one entry said. "Sophie is doing wonderfully in school now, and Thomas has such a big heart. Sometimes I wonder if Robert and I had had children." The sentence trailed off, and Robert felt a pang of regret. They had decided not to have children, focusing on their careers. Or rather, he had decided, and Elise had agreed. Determined to discover more, Robert decided to visit the community center mentioned in the diary. Driving through the poorer part of the city, he found himself in a neighborhood he would normally avoid. The center was a modest building, painted in bright colors but clearly in need of repairs. As he entered, Robert was greeted by curious and some frankly hostile looks. Clearly, he didn't belong here. A middle-aged woman approached him, her face a mix of caution and curiosity. "Can I help you, sir?" Robert cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "Yes, I'm looking for information about a volunteer, Elise Durand." The woman's face lit up with recognition, followed quickly by sadness. "Oh, Elise, what a terrible loss. She was an angel to us here." "You knew her well?" Robert asked, eager for any information. The woman nodded. "Of course. Elise was here almost every day. She helped with tutoring, fundraising, food distribution. She did everything." Robert felt a wave of shame. How did he not know any of this? "And did she ever mention two twins, Thomas and Sophie?" A soft smile appeared on the woman's face. "Ah, the little protégé of Elise. Yes, she adored those children. She always talked about how much she wanted to do more for them." As he conversed with the woman and other staff members at the center, Robert began piecing together the secret life of Elise. Each new piece of information was like a knife in his heart, reminding him of how much he had neglected, how much he had lost. Back at the mansion, Robert sat in his office, surrounded by the remnants of Elise's philanthropic life. The diary lay open in front of him, and he reread one of the last entries. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing by hiding all this from Robert, but then I remember how he reacted when I mentioned expanding our charity work. 'Why, we can't save the world, Elise,' he said. 'But what if we could save just one life? Wouldn't that be worth it? Oh, how I wish he could see the world through Thomas and Sophie's eyes. Maybe then he would understand.'" Robert closed the diary, tears silently rolling down his face. He understood now. Too late for Elise, perhaps, but not too late to honor her legacy. Picking up his phone, he dialed a number. "Thomas, it's Mr. Durand. I'd like to talk to you and Sophie. About Elise, about her work, about how we can continue what she started." As he scheduled a meeting with the twins, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Elise might be gone, but through her diary, through Thomas and Sophie, she had left a map to his redemption, and he was determined to follow each step of that path, no matter where it led him. The sun had barely risen when Robert Durand parked his luxury car in front of the Hope Community Center. The contrast between his gleaming vehicle and the worn-down buildings around it was stark, a physical reminder of the chasm between the world he inhabited and the one Elise had secretly embraced. With a deep sigh, Robert stepped out of the car, adjusting his expensive suit, an armor that suddenly felt inappropriate and out of place. He hesitated for a moment before climbing the worn steps of the center, feeling the weight of the gazes of passers-by. Inside, he was greeted by a bustle of activity. Children ran from one side to another, volunteers organized piles of clothes and food, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee mixed with the unmistakable smell of hope. Can I help you?" A firm yet gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. Robert turned to find a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back into a messy bun, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes, I'm looking for Marie," Robert replied, his voice more hesitant than usual. "I was told she worked closely with Elise Durand." The woman's face lit up with recognition, followed by a shadow of sadness. "Ah, you must be Mr. Durand. I'm Marie. Elise spoke so much about you." Robert felt a pang in his chest. "She did." Marie nodded, gesturing for him to follow her to a small room in the back. "Oh, yes. She always said you had a huge heart, hidden beneath all that businessman facade." Sitting in a worn chair, Robert watched Marie prepare 2 cups of coffee. The environment was simple, cozy, so different from the sterile offices he was accustomed to. "Marie," Robert began, accepting the offered cup, "I'm trying to understand. What was Elise's work like here? Why did she never tell me?" Marie studied him for a moment, her eyes gentle but perceptive. "Mr. Durand, Elise was the heart of this place. She didn't just donate money. She donated her time, her energy, her love. To many of these families, she was a beacon of hope." As Marie spoke, Robert found himself transported through the stories she shared, flashback narrated by Marie. "I remember one particularly cold winter day. Elise arrived with armloads of blankets and coats. She had emptied half her closet. Mr. Durand said it made no sense to have so many things while people were freezing." Robert could vividly see in his mind Elise, with her radiant smile, distributing coats he hadn't even noticed were missing. And there were the twins, of course, Thomas and Sophie. The first time Elise saw them, they were huddled in a corner, distrustful of everyone. But Elise, she had a way with children. Within minutes, she had them laughing and playing. The image of Elise, kneeling on the floor, playing with the twins, brought tears to Robert's eyes. And she came almost every day after that, helping with homework, reading stories, sometimes just listening. To those children, Mr. Durand, Elise was more than a benefactor. She was family. Present. "Family," Robert repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. "She created a family here, didn't she?" Marie nodded gently. "In a way, yes, but never doubt, Mr. Durand, that you were the center of her world. She wanted to share the love she had." Robert struggled to find his voice. "But why did she never tell me? Why keep all this a secret?" Marie sighed, setting her cup aside. "Elise, she told me once that she feared your reaction, that you wouldn't understand, that you would see it as a lost cause." The words hit Robert like a punch in the gut. How many times had he used that very phrase? How many times had he dismissed Elise's concerns with the less fortunate? And she was right, he admitted, his voice choked. "I wouldn't have understood. I was so blind." Marie reached out, gently touching Robert's arm. "But now you are here, aren't you? You are trying to understand. Elise always believed that one day you would see the world as she saw it." Robert looked around the small room, noticing for the first time the colorful drawings on the walls, the well-loved but cared-for toys, the photos of smiling, hopeful eyes. "What happens now?" he asked, more to himself than to Marie. "Say, how can I honor what she did?" Marie smiled, a smile that reminded Robert so much of Elise that it made his heart ache. "By getting to know the people she helped, by seeing the impact she had." In the minutes that followed, Marie guided Robert through the center. He met families Elise had helped find housing, children she had tutored, elderly people she visited regularly. Each story, each face lit up by the mention of Elise's name, was like a piece of a puzzle falling into place. Robert began to see not just the work Elise did, but the woman she truly was, compassionate, dedicated, tireless in her pursuit of making the world a better place. When they reached a wall covered in photos, Robert stopped, his gaze captured by an image in particular. In it, Elise was sitting on the floor, surrounded by children, her face radiant with happiness. Beside her, Thomas and Sophie smiled shyly at the camera. That was taken just a few weeks before. Marie paused, her voice faltering. Before the accident, Robert completed softly. Marie nodded. Elise was so excited that day. She had big plans, wanted to expand the center, create more programs. She talked about finally telling you, about how you could do it together. Robert felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. The realization of what could have been, of the future that was stolen not just from him and Elise, but from all these people, was overwhelming. Marie, he said, his voice firm despite the emotional turmoil, I want to know everything. Every project Elise had in mind, every dream she shared. I want to continue her work. Marie's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Mr. Durand, Elise always said you had a heart of gold. She would be so happy to hear this. As he left the center hours later, Robert felt transformed. The world around him looked different, not a place of numbers and business, but of people, stories, and possibilities. Elise had left a legacy, not of wealth or power, but of love and compassion. And now, finally, Robert was ready to be a part of it. Looking up at the sky, he whispered, I understand now, my love, and I promise I will make you proud. With that promise echoing in his heart, Robert Durand took the first step in a journey that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The legacy of Elise would live on, and through it, she would continue to make the world a better place. The address Marie had provided led Robert to a neighborhood he barely knew existed in his own city. Narrow streets lined with run-down buildings and shops with faded facades formed a labyrinth of hidden poverty. Parking his luxury car, which looked absurdly out of place, Robert took a deep breath before stepping out. The smell of mold and cheap disinfectant invaded his nostrils as he climbed the stairs to the third floor of a building that had seen better days decades ago. As he approached the indicated apartment, Robert hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door was opened almost immediately by Sophie, her large eyes widening even more at the sight of him. Mr. Durand! You really came. Her voice was a mix of surprise and relief. Hello, Sophie, Robert replied, trying to smile reassuringly. May I come in? Sophie nodded, opening the door wider. The interior of the apartment was small and dimly lit, but impeccably clean. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table, doing what looked like homework. He looked up, his eyes meeting Robert's. Mr. Durand, Thomas said, standing up. Thank you for coming. Robert followed the twins to a small bedroom at the back of the apartment. There, lying in a narrow bed, was a woman who couldn't have been more than 35, but whose face was marked by weariness and illness. Mom, Sophie said softly, Mr. Durand is here. Mom's friend. The woman opened her eyes slowly, focusing on Robert. Mr. Durand, she said, her voice weak but clear. Elise talked so much about you. Robert was at a loss for words. Mrs. Bennett, Clara Bennett. Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry you're going through this. Is there anything I can do to help? Clara smiled weakly. You already are helping, Mr. Durand. Elise. She always said you would come one day. The words hit Robert like a punch in the gut. Even here, in this small apartment, Elise's unwavering faith in him was present. Thomas stepped forward, holding a yellowed envelope. Mr. Durand, we found this among the things Elise left for us. It's addressed to you. With trembling hands, Robert took the envelope. On it, Elise's elegant handwriting said, For Robert, to be opened when the time is right. You didn't open it? Robert asked, surprised. Sophie shook her head. Elise made us promise. She said one day you would come, and we would know when it was the right time to give it to you. Robert looked at the envelope, then at the hopeful faces of the twins and at Clara, who watched him with a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. Perhaps I should read this in private, Robert said softly. Clara nodded. Children, why don't you show Mr. Durand to the living room? I'm sure he could use some privacy. In the small living room, Robert sat on the worn sofa, the envelope heavy in his hands as if made of lead. With a deep sigh, he opened it carefully and began to read. My dear Robert, if you are reading this letter, it means you have finally found your way to Thomas, Sophie, and Clara. It also means I am no longer there to explain this in person, and for that I ask your forgiveness. There is so much I wanted to tell you, so much I wished to share, but I feared you wouldn't understand, that you would see only numbers and risks, not the faces and the lives I saw. Thomas and Sophie entered our lives, yes, our lives, Robert, 5 years ago. I found them at the community center, 2 bright children struggling against impossible odds. Clara, their mother, was doing her best, but life had not been kind to her. I knew I couldn't just ignore them. So I began to help. At first, it was small things, food, clothes, help with the rent. But soon I realized what they really needed was hope, someone who believed in them. Robert, I saw so much potential in these children. Thomas has a gift for numbers that rivals yours. And Sophie, she has a heart so big, so full of compassion. They reminded me of us, of how we were before life hardened us. I know you must be wondering why I kept this a secret. The truth is, I was afraid of your reaction, afraid you wouldn't understand. But more than that, I had hope. Hope that one day you would see the world as I saw it, that you would rediscover that part of yourself that cared deeply for others. If you are reading this, it means that hope was not in vain. Robert, my love, I ask that you look at Thomas and Sophie not as a charity project, but as an extension of our family. They need guidance, opportunities, and you, my dear, need them more than you imagine. Clara is a strong woman, but she is struggling. Her illness is treatable, but costly. I had plans to help her more, to ensure she received the treatment she needed. Now I leave this task in your capable hands. Remember, Robert, the true legacy we leave is not measured in dollars or buildings with our names. It is measured in the lives we touch, the difference we make in the world. If I know you, and I do, you have a huge heart. Even if sometimes you forget it. I trust you to continue the work I started, not out of obligation, but because I know that, deep down, this is what you also desire. With all my love, now and always, Elise. Robert lowered the letter, tears streaming down his face. Each word from Elise was like a balm and a revelation at the same time. How could he have been so blind? How did he not see the incredible work his wife was doing, the passion that fueled her soul? Looking around the small room, Robert saw it with new eyes. It wasn't just a rundown apartment. It was a home, filled with love and struggle, with dreams and possibilities. Thomas and Sophie stood at the entrance, watching him with a mix of concern and hope. "Mr. Durand," Sophie asked hesitantly, "are you okay?" Robert stood up, wiping away his tears. "Yes, Sophie. In fact, I'm better than I've been in a very long time." He looked at the twins, truly seeing them for the first time. "You two, can you tell me more about Elise? About what she did for you?" The twins' faces lit up, and they began to talk, their voices overlapping in their excitement. Stories of after-school tutoring, surprise trips to the zoo, Elise showing up with bags of food when the cupboard was bare. Each word was like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, revealing an image of Elise that Robert barely knew but loved deeply. As he listened, a resolution formed in his heart. He would honor Elise's legacy, not just for her, but for Thomas, Sophie, Clara, and for himself. The man who entered that apartment was not the same one who would leave. Robert Durand had rediscovered a part of himself that had long been dormant. And with that rediscovery came a silent promise. He would make a difference, one act of kindness at a time. Robert sat in his office at the Durand mansion, Elise's letter open before him. The hours that had passed since leaving the twins' apartment were a blur. His mind was filled with images, the small apartment, Clara's weary face, the twins' hopeful eyes. And now, Elise's words, waiting to be truly absorbed. With a deep sigh, Robert began to reread the letter, this time more slowly, letting each word sink into his heart. "My dear Robert, if you are reading this letter, it means you have finally found your way to the heart of the work that became so important to me in the last years. It also means I am no longer there to share this journey with you personally, and for that, my love, I ask your forgiveness. There is so much I wanted to tell you, so many times I was on the brink of revealing everything. But I always hesitated. fearing you wouldn't understand, that you would see only numbers on a spreadsheet, not the faces and the lives that became so precious to me. It all started 5 years ago when I visited the Hope Community Center for the first time. I went there for a simple clothes donation, but what I found changed my life forever. I saw families struggling against impossible odds, brilliant children whose potential was being stifled by poverty, elderly people forgotten by the society they helped build. Among them, I met Thomas and Sophie, two extraordinary children. Robert, so intelligent, so full of life despite their circumstances. They reminded me of us when we were young, full of dreams and determination. I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't turn my back. At first it was small things: food, clothes, help with the rent for Clara. But soon I realized what they really needed was hope. Someone who believed in them, who saw them not as charity cases, but as human beings with unlimited potential. I know you must be wondering why I kept all this a secret. The truth, my love, is that I was afraid of your reaction, afraid you wouldn't understand. I remember all the times you talked about lost causes and waste of resources. Each word was like a knife in my heart because I knew the lives I was touching were far from lost. But more than fear, I had hope. Hope that one day you would see the world as I came to see it. Hope that you would rediscover that part of yourself that I know exists. That part that cares deeply, that wants to make a difference. Robert, my love, I ask that you look at Thomas and Sophie not as a charity project, but as an extension of our family. They have so much potential, so much light within them. Thomas has a gift for numbers that rivals yours. And Sophie, she has a heart so big, so full of compassion. They need guidance, opportunities. And you, my dear, need them more than you imagine. Clara is struggling, fighting a condition that is treatable but costly. I had plans to help her more, to ensure she received the treatment she needed. Now I leave this task in your capable hands. I'm not asking you to abandon everything you have built. Your talent for business is a gift, Robert. But imagine the good you can do if you apply that talent not just to increase our fortune, but to elevate those left behind. The Hope Community Center is just the beginning. There are so many projects, so many ideas I wanted to implement. You will find my plans and notes in the blue folder in my office. Use them, expand them, make them your own. Remember, Robert, the true legacy we leave is not measured in dollars or buildings with our names. It is measured in the lives we touch, the difference we make in the world. I know you have a huge heart, even if sometimes you forget it. I have seen your compassion, your ability to love deeply. That is why I fell in love with you, why I chose to spend my life by your side. I trust you to continue the work I started, not out of obligation or guilt, but because I know that, deep down, this is what you also desire. See it not as a burden, but as an opportunity to rediscover the best part of yourself. Thomas, Sophie, Clara, and all the other lives I touched, they are not just recipients of charity. They are our future, our hope for a better world. Guide them, lead them. Let them guide you back to the person I know you can be. And Robert, my love, allow yourself to be transformed by this journey. Open your heart not just to give but to receive. The love, the gratitude, the joy I found in this work, it is a treasure I want to share with you, even if I am no longer there to do it in person. You have always been my rock, my strength. Now, I ask you to be that for others. Be the man I know you are, compassionate, generous, capable of changing the world. I trust you, Robert. I trust your heart, your ability to love and to make a difference. With all my love, now and always, Elise. Robert lowered the letter, tears silently rolling down his face. Each word from Elise was like a balm and a revelation at the same time. How could he have been so blind? How did he not see the incredible work his wife was doing, the passion that fueled her soul? Looking out the window at the immaculate garden of the mansion, Robert wondered how many meals could be provided, how many lives could be changed, with the cost of maintaining that perfect garden. Turning back to his desk, Robert picked up his phone. With renewed determination, he dialed a number. "Marie, it's Robert Durand. I need your help. I want to know more about Elise's projects, about how I can continue them and expand them." As he spoke, Robert felt something stir within him, a purpose, a passion that had lain dormant for years. Elise had left more than a letter. She had left a calling, a challenge to be a better person, to make the world a better place. And Robert Durand was ready to accept that challenge, not just for Elise, but for himself and for all the lives he now knew he could touch. In the days that followed the reading of Elise's letter, Robert Durand found himself on an emotional roller coaster. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt empty and cold. Each room, each luxurious object, was a painful reminder of how far he had strayed not just from Elise, but from his own values. One morning, Robert found himself standing before Elise's portrait in the main hallway. Her eyes, painted with perfection, seemed to follow him, filled with a mix of love and disappointment. "How could I have been so blind?" he murmured to himself, the guilt weighing heavily on his chest like an anchor. Flashbacks flooded his mind. Elise trying to talk about her volunteer work during dinner, only to be interrupted by a business call, her suggesting they donate to a local charity, and him dismissing the idea as inefficient. The nights she went out, saying she was meeting friends, when in reality she was at the community center. The realization of how much he had lost, of how many opportunities for connection and understanding he had squandered, was overwhelming. Robert walked to his office, a room that had once been his refuge. Now, looking at the awards and recognitions adorning the walls, he wondered what their true value was. Picking up his phone, he dialed a familiar number. "Marie? It's Robert. Do you have a moment to talk?" Hours later, Robert found himself sitting in front of Marie at a small cafe next to the Hope Community Center. The contrast between this simple, welcoming environment and the luxurious restaurants he usually frequented did not go unnoticed. "Mr. Durand," Marie began, her voice gentle but firm, "how can I help you?" Robert stirred his coffee, searching for the right words. "Marie, I'm struggling. The more I discover about Elise's work, the more I realize how disconnected I was, not just from her, but from everything that truly matters." Marie nodded understandingly. "It's natural to feel this way, Mr. Durand. Elise was an extraordinary woman, with an incredible ability to see the best in people and situations. But how could she see the best in me?" Robert exploded, surprised by his own vulnerability. "I was so focused on myself, so obsessed with success and status. How could she love someone like that?" Marie smiled softly. "Mr. Durand, Elise didn't love an imaginary version of you. She loved you, with all your complexities and contradictions. She saw in you not just who you were, but who you could be." Those words hit Robert deeply. He remembered moments when Elise looked at him with an intensity that was almost unsettling, as if she were seeing something he himself couldn't see. But I failed her, Marie," Robert said, his voice almost a whisper. "I was so busy building an empire that I didn't see the incredible work she was doing right under my nose." Marie reached out, gently touching Robert's arm. "Mr. Durand, Elise never saw it as a failure. She saw it as a journey. She believed that one day you would find your way back to what truly matters." Robert reflected on those words. "But how can I correct this now? How can I honor her legacy when I feel like I barely knew her?" Marie sighed, setting her cup aside. "By knowing her now, through the lives she touched, through the work she began, Elise left you a map, Mr. Durand. Not a map of guilt or regret, but of redemption and purpose." As Marie spoke, Robert felt something shift within him. The guilt that had been crushing him began to give way to something different: determination. "Marie," he said, his voice gaining strength, "I want to understand everything. Every project, every person Elise helped. I want to know how I can continue her work, not just as an obligation, but as a mission." Marie's smile widened. "That, Mr. Durand, is exactly what Elise always hoped to hear." In the minutes that followed, Marie shared stories about Elise, her unwavering dedication, her ability to see potential where others saw only problems, her genuine joy in helping others. As he listened, Robert felt as if he were getting to know his wife all over again, seeing her through new eyes. Each story was a revelation. showing a side of Elise he had only glimpsed but never truly understood. When they finally parted ways, Robert felt different. The guilt was still there, but now it was accompanied by something more: hope. Walking back to his car, Robert paused to observe the Hope Community Center. He saw children entering for after-school classes, elderly people gathering for a socialization program, young mothers attending a job skills workshop. In that moment, Robert Durand made a decision. He would not just continue Elise's work, he would expand it, using his resources and connections to make an even bigger difference. "I understand now, Elise," he murmured to himself, "and I promise I won't let you down." With a new sense of purpose, Robert got into his car. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about business or profits. He was thinking about possibilities, about lives that could be changed, about a legacy that was worth building. Robert Durand adjusted his glasses, leaning over the pile of documents spread across his desk at the Hope Community Center. In the past weeks, he had practically moved into the small office that once belonged to Elise, determined to unravel every aspect of his late wife's work. As he flipped through financial reports and project proposals, Robert was continually astonished by the depth and breadth of Elise's involvement. This wasn't just casual charity. It was a full-fledged commitment, a vision to transform lives. "Mr. Durand?" Marie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I found more files that might interest you." Robert accepted the files with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Marie. I don't know what I'd do without your help." Opening the first file, Robert froze. It was a detailed proposal for a low-cost housing complex, complete with a job training center, daycare, and medical clinic. The notes in the margins, in Elise's familiar handwriting, revealed a dream of creating a self-sustaining community for vulnerable families. "My God," Robert murmured, running his fingers over the meticulous sketches. She thought of everything. Marie, observing his reaction, commented softly, "This was Elise's dream project. She worked on it for months, refining every detail." Robert looked at Marie, a silent question in his eyes. "She never got to implement it," Marie explained. "The cost, well, it was substantial. Elise was trying to find a way to make it viable without compromising the vision." At that moment, the office door opened and Thomas and Sophie entered, their faces lighting up at the sight of Robert. "Mr. Durand," Sophie exclaimed. "We came to help like you asked." Robert smiled, genuinely happy to see the twins. In the past weeks, they had become a constant presence in his life, helping him navigate Elise's legacy. "Perfect timing, kids," Robert said, showing them the plans. "Have you ever heard of the Phoenix Project?" Thomas's eyes widened at the sight of the drawings. "The Phoenix Project. Mrs. Elise showed us this once. She said it would be a place where families like ours could really start over." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. She talked about how there would be classes for adults to learn new skills and a safe place for kids to play after school. Hearing the excitement in the twins' voices, Robert felt a pang of regret. How many times had Elise tried to share this passion with him, only to be ignored? "Can you tell me more?" Robert asked, pulling up chairs for the twins. "About this project, about how Elise helped you and other families." For the next few minutes, Thomas and Sophie shared stories that made Robert's heart ache. Elise didn't just provide material help. She invested time and love. She tutored children after school, organized job fairs for unemployed parents, and even accompanied the elderly to doctor's appointments. "One time," Sophie said, her eyes shining with the memory, "Mrs. Elise found out our neighbor, Mr. Johnson, couldn't afford his heart medication. The next day, she showed up with a bag full of medicines and food." Thomas added, "And remember when Mrs. Ramirez's daughter needed surgery? Mrs. Elise not only helped pay for it, but stayed at the hospital with her during the entire recovery." Each story was a revelation, showing a side of Elise that Robert barely knew but loved deeply. As the twins spoke, Robert turned his attention back to the financial documents. Something wasn't adding up. The amounts donated to the center and the expenses for the projects far exceeded the official contributions recorded. With growing discomfort, Robert began cross-referencing dates and amounts. The truth hit him like a punch in the gut. Elise had been using large sums of her personal fortune to fund these projects, far beyond the agreed-upon donations for charity. "Marie," Robert called, his voice trembling, "did you know about this? About how much Elise was investing personally?" Marie hesitated before answering. "She made me promise to keep it a secret, Mr. Durand, Elise. She didn't want you to worry or try to stop her." Robert closed his eyes, feeling a wave of emotions: admiration for Elise's generosity, guilt for not noticing, fear of what this meant. "Mr. Durand," Sophie's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you mad at Mrs. Elise?" Robert looked at the twins' concerned faces and at Marie, who watched him with apprehension. In that moment, he made a decision. "No, Sophie," he replied softly. "I'm not mad. I'm inspired." Standing up, Robert walked to the window, looking out at the bustle of activity. He saw families receiving food baskets, children laughing in an art class, a group of adults leaving a job skills workshop. Turning back to Marie and the twins, Robert spoke with renewed determination. "The Phoenix Project. We're going to make it happen, not just as Elise planned, but bigger, better. We're going to make it her legacy." Marie's eyes filled with tears, while Thomas and Sophie exchanged excited glances. "But Mr. Durand," Marie began, "the cost—" Robert raised a hand, gently interrupting her. "Money is not an issue, Marie. Elise was right to use our fortune for this. It's time I did my part." In that small office filled with dreams and plans, Robert Durand felt, for the first time in a long while, that he was on the right path. The discoveries of the day were not just about projects and finances. They were about truly understanding Elise's heart and, in the process, rediscovering his own. With the twins beaming with excitement and Marie smiling through her tears, Robert began outlining the next steps. Elise's legacy would not just continue, it would flourish, touching more lives than she ever imagined possible. And for Robert, it was just the beginning of his own journey of redemption and purpose. Robert Durand adjusted his tie, facing his reflection in the elevator mirror. The man looking back at him seemed different. His eyes held a gleam of determination that had been absent for too long. Today was a decisive day. The elevator doors opened to the boardroom of Durand Enterprises. Around the polished mahogany table, his top financial advisors and executives awaited, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Gentlemen," Robert began, his voice firm, "thank you for your presence at this emergency meeting. We are here to discuss a significant shift in the direction of our company and the allocation of our resources." He paused, observing the reactions. Some exchanged nervous glances, others leaned forward, intrigued. "As you know, my late wife Elise was involved in philanthropic work before her passing. What you don't know is the extent and impact of that work." Robert then detailed his discoveries from the past weeks: Elise's deep involvement in the Hope Community Center, the projects she initiated, the lives she touched. Finally, he came to the crucial point. "It is my intention not only to continue Elise's work, but to significantly expand it. Starting with the Phoenix Project, a housing complex and training center for vulnerable families." The silence that followed was broken by Charles Winthrop, the CFO, who cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Durand, with all due respect, the costs of such a project would be substantial." "I am well aware of that," Robert interjected. "But it is an investment I am willing to make, both personally and through the company." The room erupted in protests and questions. Robert let them speak, observing calmly. When the tumult subsided, he spoke again. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but I ask you to consider this not just as charity, but as an opportunity to redefine the legacy of Durand Enterprises, to make a real difference in the world." For the next few minutes, Robert presented a detailed plan: how the project could be structured, the potential benefits, the impact on the company's image. Gradually, he saw the resistance in some faces begin to fade. "I'm not asking for an immediate decision," Robert concluded, "but I am informing you that this is the new direction of the company. Those who wish to be part of this new journey are welcome. For the others, well, I understand if you choose to pursue other paths, Leaving the boardroom, Robert felt the weight of his decision, but also a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. His phone rang. It was Marie. Mr. Durand, Clara, the twins' mother, has had a relapse. They're at the hospital now. Without hesitation, Robert changed his route. I'm on my way, Marie. At the hospital, Robert found Thomas and Sophie in the corridor, their small faces marked by worry. Mr. Durand, Sophie exclaimed, running to hug him. Thomas, always more reserved, stayed back, but the relief in his eyes was evident. How is she? Robert asked gently. The doctors are with her now, Thomas replied. They said they need to do more tests. Robert nodded, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Don't worry. We'll make sure your mother gets the best treatment possible. In the hours that followed, Robert found himself navigating a world entirely new to him. He spoke with doctors, ensuring Clara received priority care. He organized meals for the twins, making sure they had a comfortable place to wait, and even helped Thomas with his homework while they awaited news. When the doctor finally emerged to speak with them, Robert was by the twins' side, a steady and reassuring presence. Mrs. Bennett will be fine, the doctor assured them. But she will need continuous treatment and special care for a while. Before Thomas or Sophie could worry about the costs, Robert intervened. Don't worry about any of that. I'll take care of everything. The twins' eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and Robert felt something stir within him, a mix of emotion and purpose that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Later, sitting by Clara's bedside, Robert reflected on the day's events. The resistance from his executives seemed insignificant compared to the hopeful smiles of Thomas and Sophie. The concerns about profits and stocks paled in comparison to the real struggles of families like Clara's. Clara opened her eyes slowly, focusing on Robert. Mr. Durand, she murmured, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. The twins told me what you did. How can I ever thank? Robert shook his head, gently holding Clara's hand. No need for thanks. I'm just continuing the work Elise started. In that moment, looking at Clara's tired but hopeful face, at the twins sleeping peacefully on the sofa, Robert felt a certainty he hadn't known in a long time. He was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The path ahead would be challenging, he knew. There would be resistance, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, Robert Durand felt truly alive, truly purposeful. Elise had left more than a legacy of charity. She had left a call to a life of meaning and impact, and Robert was determined to honor that call, one day at a time, one life at a time. As night fell over the city, Robert made a silent promise to Elise, to the twins, to Clara, and to himself. He would not just continue Elise's work. He would elevate it to heights she had only dreamed possible. And in doing so, perhaps he could become the man Elise always knew he could be. Christmas Eve dawned with a soft winter sun, casting a pale light over the snow-covered city. Robert Durand stood at the entrance of the Phoenix Project construction site, the contrast between the once abandoned lot and the now bustling activity stark and satisfying. Good morning, Mr. Durand, the foreman called out, approaching with blueprints in hand. We have some updates to review. Robert smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction. In the past months, the Elise Durand Foundation had moved from paper to a force for change in the community. The Phoenix Project was just the beginning. As he walked through the site, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The initial resistance from his executives had given way to cautious support as the benefits to the company's image and the potential tax incentives became evident. Still, balancing the demands of his traditional business with his new philanthropic mission was a constant challenge. His phone rang. It was his assistant. Mr. Durand, don't forget the board meeting in an hour. Robert sighed. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be there. Driving back to the city center, Robert felt the weight of his dual roles. At Durand Enterprises, he was still the ruthless CEO, making deals and maximizing profits. But with each decision, he now filtered through a new lens. How would this affect the foundation? How could he use the company's resources to amplify its social impact? In the boardroom, Robert presented the latest figures, his mind already racing ahead to his next meeting with Marie. As he concluded the presentation, his phone vibrated with a message from Marie. Urgent, concerning news about the neighborhood. Need to talk to you. Intrigued and concerned, Robert hurried the meeting to a close. As soon as possible, he headed to the Hope Community Center. Marie greeted him with a grave expression. "Mr. Durand, we have a problem." She handed him a set of documents. Robert scanned them, his face paling as he absorbed the information. "A luxury real estate development project," he murmured, incredulous. "Here." Marie nodded sadly. "Apparently, our revitalization efforts have attracted unwanted attention. A major developer is planning to buy several blocks, including where many of our families currently live." Robert felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The Phoenix Project and other efforts had begun to transform the neighborhood, bringing hope and stability. Now, that very improvement was threatening to displace the people they were trying to help. "How much time do we have?" Robert asked, his mind already racing with possible solutions. "Negotiations have already begun with some owners," Marie replied. But the full plan hasn't been made public yet." Robert stood up, pacing the room. The businessman in him recognized the cold logic behind the luxury development. The neighborhood was appreciating in value. It was a smart investment. But the philanthropist he had become in the past months rebelled against the idea. "We need to do something," he declared. "We can't just let these families be pushed out." At that moment, Thomas and Sophie entered the room, their faces lighting up at the sight of Robert. "Mr. Durand," Sophie exclaimed, "we came to show you our grades. Mom said we should thank you for making it possible for us to focus on school." The sight of the twins reinforced Robert's resolve. He couldn't let them down, not after everything they had been through. "Marie," Robert said, his voice firm with renewed determination, "I need you to gather all the information you can about this development project. Owners involved, proposed plans and everything." Turning to the twins, he smiled. "And you two, how about giving me a tour of the neighborhood? I want to see all the important places through your eyes." In the following hours, Robert walked through the streets of the neighborhood, seeing it through the eyes of Thomas and Sophie, the small park where children played after school, the corner grocery store where everyone gathered for the latest news, the community library that the foundation had helped renovate. Each corner, each establishment had a story, a significance that went beyond property values. Robert began to understand truly what was at stake. Back in his office at Durand Enterprises, Robert found himself at a crossroads. As a CEO, he understood the logic of the development. As a philanthropist and guardian of Elise's legacy, he couldn't allow the community to be destroyed. Looking out at the city skyline, Robert had an epiphany. Perhaps the solution wasn't in choosing between economic development and community preservation. Perhaps there was a way to achieve both. With renewed energy, Robert began to sketch out a plan. He would use the resources and connections of Durand Enterprises to create an alternative development proposal. A project that included affordable housing, commercial spaces for local businesses, and community facilities. It wouldn't be easy. He would face resistance from all sides, from the developers who wanted maximum profit, from some community members who feared any change, and even from his own executives who might see this as a risky deviation. But as he worked late into the night, refining his vision, Robert felt a growing certainty. This was the next chapter in Elise's legacy. Not just preserving what existed, but creating something new and better. A model of development that could be replicated in other communities. When the sun rose, illuminating the first drafts of his ambitious plan, Robert knew he was on the right path. The challenge ahead was immense, but for the first time in his life, he felt he was fighting for something greater than himself. With determination, Robert picked up the phone. It was time to assemble his team, to begin the battle to save not just a neighborhood, but to redefine what responsible urban development looked like. The community hall was packed, the air buzzing with a mix of anxiety and hope. Robert Durand stood on the small makeshift stage, looking out at the faces turned toward him, some hopeful, others skeptical, all concerned. He took a deep breath, remembering why he was there. "Good evening, everyone," Robert began, his voice steady. "We are here to discuss the future of our community. As many of you know, there are plans for a major real estate development in this area." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Robert raised his hand, asking for silence. "But I am here to tell you that we have a choice. We can allow others to decide our fate, or we can fight for a vision that preserves the heart of this community while embracing progress." In the days that followed that first meeting, Robert threw himself into the battle to save the neighborhood. He mobilized a team of lawyers, urban planners, and community activists. His business connections, once used to close lucrative deals, were now directed toward a greater cause. One afternoon, while reviewing strategies with his team, Robert received an unexpected visitor. It was George Hawthorne, an old business associate and now the primary investor in the gentrification project. "Robert, my old friend," George smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I hear you're causing some trouble for our development." Robert stood up, meeting George's gaze. "Not trouble, George, just doing what's right." "Doing what's right," George laughed without humor. "Since when is impeding progress the right thing? Think of the jobs we're creating, the economic boost for the city, at the cost of displacing entire families, destroying a community," Robert countered. "There's a better way to do this, George, a way that benefits everyone, not just the investors." The conversation stretched on, tense and charged. When George finally left, his veiled threat lingered in the air. "Be careful, Robert. You're playing with forces that can crush you and everything you've built." But Robert was undeterred. Instead, the threat only fueled his determination. In the following weeks, Robert worked tirelessly. He organized more community meetings, listened to concerns, and incorporated ideas from the residents. Thomas and Sophie, along with other families, became the public face of the campaign, sharing their stories with the media and at public hearings. "Mr. Durand didn't just help us," Sophie declared in an emotional interview. "He showed us how to fight for ourselves, to believe we deserve a better future." The pressure, however, was intense. Old allies in the business world began to distance themselves from Robert. Some members of the Durand Enterprises board expressed concerns about the impact on their business. One evening, exhausted after another day of legal battles and negotiations, Robert found himself alone in his office, looking at Elise's portrait. "Am I doing the right thing?" he murmured. "But at what cost?" It was at this moment of doubt that Marie entered, carrying a stack of letters. "Mr. Durand, I thought you might like to see these," she said, handing him the envelopes. "They're from families in the community. They've been writing to express their support and gratitude." Robert opened letter after letter, reading words of hope, gratitude, and belief in the future he was fighting for. With tears in his eyes, Robert looked at Marie. "Thank you. I needed this." Renewed, Robert returned to the fight with redoubled vigor. He refined his alternative development plan, incorporating ideas from the community and consulting with experts in sustainable urban development. The new proposal he presented was revolutionary, a mixed-use development that included affordable housing, commercial spaces for local businesses, green spaces, and an expanded community center. Most importantly, the plan ensured that no current residents would be displaced. "It's not just about preserving what we have," Robert explained at a crucial presentation to the City Council. "It's about creating a model of growth that benefits everyone, residents, businesses, and the city as a whole." The battle reached its climax at a tense public hearing. On one side were the powerful investors behind the original development. On the other, Robert and the united community. When it was his turn to speak, Robert stood up, feeling the weight of all the lives that would be affected by this decision. "As ladies and gentlemen of the council," so he began, "we stand at a crossroads that will define not just the future of this neighborhood, but the character of our city. We can choose the easy path of quick profits, or we can take the more challenging but infinitely more rewarding path of inclusive growth." He continued, presenting his vision with passion and clarity. When he concluded, Robert looked directly at the council members. "This is not just a development plan, it is a statement of values. It is saying that we believe in a city that grows not at the expense of its citizens, but with them." The silence that followed was broken by a wave of applause from the gallery, where community members were gathered. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of deliberations and backroom negotiations. When the council finally announced their decision, the room erupted in cheers and tears of relief. Robert's plan had been approved, with some minor modifications. As the crowd celebrated around him, Robert found himself surrounded by Thomas, Sophie, and their families. "You did it, Mr. Durand," Thomas exclaimed, his eyes shining with admiration. Sophie hugged him tightly. "Mrs. Elise would be so proud." Robert felt a wave of emotion hit him. He looked around at the joyful, hopeful faces and knew he had made the right choice. It wasn't just about saving a neighborhood. It was about redefining what successful business leadership looked like in the 21st century. That night, as he returned home, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The man who had once been focused solely on profits and power had become a champion for community and compassion. The mansion, once a symbol of his loneliness and ambition, now pulsed with the memories of the celebration and the promise of many more to come. The city before him was no longer just a battleground for business conquests, but a tapestry of interconnected lives, each with the potential to shine. Robert smiled, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on his face. The true miracle of Christmas, he realized, wasn't just the transformation of a neighborhood or even his own life. It was the revelation that every person has the power to make a difference, that every act of kindness can set off ripples of change that extend far beyond what we can see. With a final look at the hopeful horizon, Robert turned back inside. There was work to be done, lives to be touched, a legacy of love and compassion to be honored and expanded, and for the first time in a long time, Robert Durand was truly eager for the future, ready to face each new day with courage, compassion, and the certainty that in together we can create a better world, one act of kindness at a time.